welcome to Mind Matters, where we take a peek inside the human mind to understand how it impacts on our attitudes and behaviors. I'm Liezl Thom, and once again I am joined by renowned psychologist Dr Eugene VIljoen, who will help us understand ourselves and other people a little bit better. Hello Eugene.
Hi Liezl. I think we have a heavy topic today.
We do indeed, bipolar disorder. But let's start with, more generally, what is a mood disorder?
In layman's terms, I think it will be described as, do you feel good? Do you feel down? Do you feel energized? Or do you have no energy? That in itself would, I think, be a description of a mood disorder.
Mm-hmm. And mood disorders can be treated. That is the good news.
Absolutely. We know now so much more than what we did, let's say 20 years ago, in terms of mood disorders. We have an array of different treatment modalities and medications available, especially for that.
Mm-hmm. So bipolar disorder is one of the better known mood disorders. How would you define bipolar disorder?
Maybe just to come back to your reference to bipolar, I think there's no one walking the streets that does not know about the existence of bipolar. It's as if it has become a very popular sort of diagnosis within psychiatry in itself. There are different things that we use when we look at bipolar. You actually distinguish between two different types of bipolar. You have bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 disorder. Now you cannot have both at the same time. You either have the one or the other. In essence, it comes down to bipolar 1 being your mood is more elevated. In other words, you have more manic episodes, and a manic episode would be regarded as you are energized. You do things that you would not necessarily do under other circumstances. You might be hypersexual. You might spend a lot of money. You might even be more aggressive as opposed to your other side. And then you do not really have those very low sort of moods that one gets in the bipolar 2. So bipolar 2, therefore, is the one where most of your mood resembles a down feeling with very little hypomanic or manic episodes.
Bipolar disorder in the past used to be known as manic depressive mood disorder, right?
That's correct, yes. But nowadays we talk about bipolar because it distinguishes between the bipolar 1, bipolar 2, as opposed to manic depressive didn't really sort of give us a very good description of where you situate yourself. Mm-hmm. Then I also need to maybe just tell you that these moods might be seasonal. People might be more down during winter times, and we see that in the northern hemisphere. In other words, we can then also speak about what triggers these events. But things like seasonal depressions in itself also forms part of the bipolar spectrum. Also, other aspects is the rapid cycling. People can rapid cycle between being manic and being depressed within one day, or within a week, or maybe 2 weeks, or maybe every 6 months. That would not necessarily be rapid cycling. But rapid cycling in itself is also an important part of the diagnosis.
Eugene, what triggers bipolar disorder? I mean, some people seem to amble along nicely throughout their lives, and then one day, all of a sudden, it's almost like there's a short circuit in the brain.
Bipolar in itself is something that you can see maybe when you look back at the life of a person, that it has been coming from a long time. There are episodes of depression, maybe in adolescence or in puberty, or maybe in terms of the young adulthood, period. And if that goes untreated, it can eventually escalate towards more major events in which it might happen that you might then later be diagnosed with a bipolar. But in terms of your question again, what would trigger maybe a bipolar event? And there are 4 distinct aspects. The one is obviously genetics. So it might be running in families. Secondly, hormonal differences and things that happens in terms of the hormonal system. And I do not necessarily want to single this out, but in terms of the menstruation cycle, where the hormones of a female would change within a period of 28 days, you might see that to be more obvious. There are other hormones which also plays a part, might be testosterone, and others that I do not necessarily want to complicate the topic with. Thirdly, stressors. What type of stressors do you have in your life? Financial stressors, relationship stress, work stress in itself might also contribute to that. And fourthly, a very important one that is not always maybe acknowledged as such, but is substances. Anything like cat, heroin, cocaine, codeine that you find in most pain tablets, alcohol, dacha or marijuana, all does play a role in precipitating a bipolar event. And obviously if you have all 4 of those, you are most certainly prone to maybe have a bipolar disorder.
Eugene, as you were describing bipolar 1, in other words, the manic phase, it didn't sound at all bad to me. I mean, except for the hypersexuality and the perhaps shopping, spending more than you have. What are the downsides to feeling good and feeling high?
There's nothing wrong with that. It's only detrimental if it actually affects your life in a negative way. In other words, if you spend more money than what you have, you are going to get into trouble. Example, for instance, someone that went out in one of those phases and he bought himself a very, very expensive luxury car, but he didn't have 2 cents to rub against each other. And he was eventually convicted of fraud because he was spending money that he never had. So yes, if things like that happens, it is definitely not wonderful. And that's why we also find that people who do suffer from bipolar 1 do not always comply with their medications, because the medications in itself brings the mood down more towards maybe not necessarily a flatliner, but
neutral.
But a neutral, and they do not like neutral because they feel they are more alive. They feel they are more creative when they have these highs. Again, if it is not detrimental and if it doesn't put you in some form of trouble or distress, then most probably it's viewed as normal.
But bipolar 2, that deep, dark depression, that is that when most people seek help?
Many a time, yes. That is when they do seek help, because they cannot necessarily function. They do not want to get up in the morning, they do not want to go to work, and they lose out in terms of their productivity. Yes, there are obvious complaints during those times of them and the way in which they function, but in themselves they do not feel good and well, as opposed to the manic phases, where they feel energized and they feel that they are productive. Maybe just to your reference then, is it that we see that people who suffer from bipolar 1 come and report it themselves? Usually not. They are being sent for treatment to the hospitals because of what they've done that is not really regarded as normal. But their own way of viewing it is not necessarily that. So a big aspect is to tell these people where the bipolar 1 behavior becomes detrimental.
So what is the difference between a bipolar 2 depressive episode and what is called depression?
In many an instance, one needs to distinguish between a major depressive disorder and a bipolar type depressive disorder. In essence, it comes down to the same thing. The treatment in itself does not really differ. But do people stay depressed for long times, maybe 6 months or a year or so, and not being able to function without any concomitant hypomanic episodes? Is then that would be diagnosed as a major depressive disorder as opposed to a bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorders would have those heights in terms of mood. It will not necessarily be just a depressed state the whole time.
So bipolar disorder is far more than just mood swings.
Definitely. Most definitely. If it impacts on your life to the extent where you cannot function, then it becomes detrimental and therefore a disorder.
So if you have severe mood swings that impact on your life to such an extent that you cannot function in your normal day-to-day life, then perhaps it's time that you seek help. From Dr. Eugene VIljoen and from me, Liezl Thom, see you next week on Mind Matters. Bye-bye.